The light inside the gallery was very bright. It was a clean, cold kind of light that made everything look expensive. The walls were painted a soft white color, and on them hung large paintings in heavy frames. The floor was made of smooth stone that reflected the ceiling lights. It was the kind of place where people walked softly and spoke in low voices. A young woman stood near the far window. She was not looking at the art, though. She was looking at the people. Her name was Aisha. She was wearing a simple blue dress. It was not a new dress. The hem had been fixed by hand, and the fabric was soft from being washed many times. She wore flat shoes because she had been on her feet all day. To anyone walking by, she looked like she didn't quite belong in such a fancy room. She looked too real, too simple. Aisha turned her head slightly to the left. In the corner of the big room, near a tall pillar, a woman was scrubbing the base of the wall. This was Aisha's mother. Her mother worked very hard for the gallery. She cleaned the floors, wiped the glass, and made sure the dust never settled. Her mother wore a gray uniform. It was loose on her shoulders because she had lost weight recently. She moved the cloth in slow, circular circles. She was very careful not to touch the art or bump into the walls. She kept her head down. She was used to being invisible. In a place like this, filled with gold jewelry and sharp suits, a cleaner was often treated like a piece of furniture. People walked past her without looking down. They laughed and drank their drinks, stepping carefully around her bucket as if it were a puddle of dirty water. But they never said thank you. Aisha felt a tightness in her chest. She knew her mother was tired. She knew her mother's back hurt from bending over all day. But her mother never complained. She always said that work was a blessing, and that providing for her family was the only thing that mattered. Aisha walked over to the corner. Her shoes made no sound on the stone floor. She stood there for a moment, just watching her mother work. The older woman did not notice her at first. She was focused on a small spot on the marble, determined to make it shine. "Mom," Aisha said softly. The older woman stopped. She straightened her back slowly and turned around. When she saw Aisha, her tired face broke into a wide smile. It was a smile that made her look years younger. "You came," her mother whispered. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron, even though they were already clean. She didn't want to get dust on her daughter's dress. "I promised I would," Aisha said. She reached into her small bag and pulled out a bottle of water. "You've been working for 4 hours. You need to drink." The mother took the water with both hands, as if it were a gift. "Thank you, my child. I'm fine. The air in here is just a little dry." Aisha looked around the room. The gallery was starting to fill up. It was the night of the big show. People were coming to see the new exhibit and to meet the famous artist whose work was being displayed. Everyone looked beautiful. The men wore dark suits and shiny shoes. The women wore colorful dresses that rustled when they walked. They held glasses of red and yellow liquid. They smelled of strong perfume and expensive cologne. "You should go out there," her mother said, nodding toward the main hall. "Look at the paintings. Meet people. Don't stay here in the corner with me." "I am fine here," Aisha said. She leaned against the pillar. "I like seeing you," her mother laughed quietly. It was a kind sound. "No, you are young and talented. You should be where the light is. I am just the cleaner. I belong in the shadows." Aisha shook her head. "You don't belong in the shadows? You make this place beautiful. If you didn't clean it, no one would want to come here." The mother reached out and patted Aisha's hand. Her hand was rough and warm, marked by years of hard work. "You have a kind heart. But please, go. Don't let people think you are just the cleaning lady's daughter. Go stand with the artists." Aisha sighed, but she knew her mother was right. If she stayed in the corner, people would stare. They would whisper. She kissed her mother on the cheek quick. Gentle gesture and turned to walk back into the crowd as she moved away from the safety of the corner. The air felt heavier. Aisha walked with her head up, but she could feel eyes on her. She saw a group of people standing near a large sculpture. They were laughing loudly. One woman was wearing a sparkling necklace that caught the light every time she moved. She was holding a glass of wine and gesturing with it, making grand movements as she spoke. Aisha stopped a few feet away from them, pretending to look at a painting on the wall. She could hear their voices. They weren't whispering. They didn't care who heard them. "I really don't understand why they allowed the staff to be visible during these events," the woman with the necklace said. She wrinkled her nose as if she smelled something bad. "It ruins the magic. I feel like I'm at a shopping mall, not a gallery." Her friend, a tall man with a very straight back, nodded in agreement. "It is distracting. I was trying to look at the brushwork on that landscape, and all I could see was that woman scrubbing the floor. It takes away from the class of the event." "I know," the woman said. She took a sip of her drink. "And did you know she has a daughter? I saw her earlier. Plain little thing. Standing near the service exit, probably waiting for her shift to end so they can go home together." Aisha stopped breathing for a second. She stared at the painting in front of her, but she wasn't seeing the colors. She was listening. "Maybe she is hoping to find a rich husband," the man joked. He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "That seems to be the only reason girls like that come to these things. Looking for a handout." "It is sad, really," the woman added. "They should know their place. Cleaning is a respectable job, certainly, but mixing with us? It's just awkward." Aisha felt her face get hot. A fire started in her stomach, burning up into her chest. She wanted to turn around. She wanted to tell them that the woman they were mocking was the strongest person she knew. She wanted to tell them that her mother had worked 2 jobs for 20 years just to put food on the table. She wanted to tell them that her mother had more class in her little finger than they had in their entire expensive outfits. But Aisha didn't move. She remembered her mother's words. Asterisk, don't make a scene. Dignity is quiet. Asterisk. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. She looked at the people in the reflection of the glass window. They looked happy. They looked superior. They had no idea who she was. They had no idea that the plain little thing they were talking about was the reason the main event was even happening. They thought she was nobody. They thought she was just a girl from the wrong side of town, dressed in cheap clothes, waiting for a cleaning lady. Aisha turned away from the painting. She walked deeper into the gallery. The noise of the party grew louder. Glasses clinked. People laughed. The air buzzed with conversation. Aisha moved through it like a ghost. She was invisible to them. She was just part of the background, another prop in their beautiful night. She found a quiet spot near the middle of the room. There was a large podium set up, with a microphone standing tall and silent. A red ribbon was draped across the front of the stage. Behind the podium, the wall was empty. A large cloth was covering something big, hiding it from view. Aisha looked at that empty space. She thought about her mother in the corner, scrubbing the floor. She thought about the cruel words of the guests. She thought about all the years of hard work, the missed holidays, the sore muscles, and the sacrifices. Tonight was not about the rich people with their sharp suits and sparkling necklaces. Tonight was not about their approval. Tonight was about something real. Aisha stood straight. She smoothed the front of her simple blue dress. She looked at the red cloth on the wall, and a small smile touched her lips. She knew what was under that cloth, and soon everyone else would know too. The room was filled with people who thought they owned the world. But in a few minutes, the world was going to tilt on its axis. The girl they ignored was about to show them who she really was. The cleaning worker's daughter was ready to speak. The low hum of conversation in the main hall grew louder as more people arrived. The room was filling up quickly. It seemed like everyone in the city who had money, or who wanted to look like they had money, was there. Aisha moved carefully through the crowd. She kept her arms close to her sides, trying not to bump into anyone. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with the smell of fresh wax from the floor was strong. It made her head spin a little. She found herself standing next to a tall table that held trays of cheese and small crackers. She wasn't hungry, but it was a good place to stand and watch. She felt small in this room. The ceiling was very high, and the windows were huge. The people around her seemed to take up so much space. They laughed with their mouths wide open. They touched each other's arms when they spoke. They owned the space in a way Aisha did not. From where she stood, she could see her mother across the room. Her mother had moved from the corner and was now wiping down the glass cases that held the jewelry. She moved slowly and methodically. She was very careful not to get in the way of the guests. A few times, someone walked right past her, almost hitting her with a swinging purse or a sharp elbow. Without even saying, "Excuse me," her mother just stepped aside, kept her head down, and continued working. Aisha felt a familiar pang in her heart. It was a mix of love and sadness. She loved her mother so much. She loved how kind she was, how she never got angry at the rude people. But it also made Aisha angry. She knew how hard her mother worked. She knew the pain in her mother's knees and the ache in her back. These people saw a uniform. They saw a servant. They didn't see a person who had feelings, or a woman who had sacrificed everything for her child. The group of people Aisha had noticed earlier, the woman with the sparkling
necklace
and the tall man, had moved closer to the refreshment table. They were standing just a few feet away from Aisha. There were 3 of them now. Another woman had joined them, wearing a bright red dress that looked very stiff and uncomfortable. "It is just so tiresome," the woman in the red dress said. She was fanning herself with a stiff piece of paper. "I mean, really, couldn't they wait until after the event to clean? The smell of the cleaning products is giving me a headache." The woman with the necklace nodded vigorously. "I was just saying that. It is completely ruining the vibe. I came here for art and culture, not to watch someone mop the floor," the tall man chuckled. He took a sip of his drink and looked around the room as if he were looking for something better to do. "It's the owner, I suppose. He tries too hard to be humble, hiring locals, keeping the staff visible. He thinks it gives the place character. Personally, I think it just makes it look low class." Aisha gripped the edge of the table. Her knuckles turned white. She wanted to walk over and spill the man's drink. She wanted to tell them that the low-class smell was probably just the smell of hard work, something they knew nothing about. But she stood still. She counted to 10 in her head, just like her mother taught her to do when she was angry. Speaking of the staff, the woman in the red dress whispered, lowering her voice but not lowering it enough. "Did you see the older woman? The one in the gray uniform?" "The cleaner," the necklace woman asked. "Yes, I heard one of the other staff talking about her," the red dress woman continued, leaning in conspiratorially. "Apparently she has a daughter who is here tonight." Aisha held her breath. She felt her heart beating faster against her ribs. "Really?" the tall man asked, sounding bored. "Where is she?" "Probably helping out in the kitchen, I assume." "That's the funny part," the red dress woman said, and she let out a sharp, high-pitched laugh. "She isn't in the kitchen. Apparently she thinks she is an artist. I heard she actually applied to have her work shown here. Can you imagine?" The necklace woman laughed too. She covered her mouth with her hand, but her eyes were cold. "Oh, please. That is pathetic. What does she know about art? She probably draws on napkins while her mother scrubs toilets. It's just desperate, isn't it?" The tall man chimed in, trying to punch above her weight class. "It's embarrassing for everyone. They should know where they belong. You can't just mix with high society because you want to." Aisha looked down at her shoes. She felt tears stinging the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. They were talking about her. They were talking about her dreams, her hard work, and her life as if it were a joke. To them, she was just a punchline, a story to make them feel better about themselves. She thought about her studio. It wasn't a fancy room in a big building. It was a small corner of their living room, separated from the kitchen by a curtain. She painted there late at night after her shifts at the diner. She painted while her mother slept in the next room. She used cheap paint and worn brushes. She poured her soul onto those canvases. These people bought art as an investment. They bought it to match their furniture. They didn't know what it meant to create something out of nothing. They didn't know the struggle of trying to find your voice when the world tries to silence you. Aisha took a slow, shaky breath. She lifted her head and looked straight ahead. Across the room, her mother had stopped working. She was standing by a pillar, looking down at her hands. Even from this distance, Aisha could see her mother's shoulders slumped. She knew her mother had heard them. Her mother heard these kinds of things often, but it never hurt any less. Aisha wanted to run to her. She wanted to hug her and tell her that she was the most important person in the world. But then, a man in a dark suit walked onto the stage. He tapped the microphone once. The sound echoed through the room, a sharp thump that cut through the noise of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please," he said. His voice was loud and clear. The chatting slowly died down. People turned toward the stage. The group next to Aisha turned their backs on her, ignoring her completely now that they had something else to focus on. They adjusted their clothes and put on polite, interested faces. Aisha stayed by the table. She watched the man on the stage. It was Mr. Sterling, the owner of the gallery. He looked nervous, which was strange for a man who usually looked so confident. He smoothed his tie and looked out at the sea of faces. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began. "Tonight is a very special night for us. We are not just here to look at beautiful things. We are here to discover something new. For years, the art world has been looking for the next big talent. We have searched the big cities, the expensive schools, and the famous galleries." He paused for effect. Aisha saw the tall man and the women nodding. They liked this kind of talk. It made them feel important to be part of the search. "But sometimes," Mr. Sterling continued, "we find gold in the places we least expect. Sometimes true genius doesn't come from a fancy classroom. It comes from life itself. It comes from struggle, from pain, and from deep, deep love." Aisha felt a sudden calmness wash over her. The anger in her chest cooled down. It was replaced by a steady, quiet strength. She looked at the back of the tall man's head. She looked at the woman's sparkling necklace. They had no idea. They were standing there, mocking her, judging her by her dress and her mother's job. They thought they knew everything. They thought she was nobody. Aisha reached into her small bag and touched the folded piece of paper inside. It was her bio. It was the proof of who she was. "We are about to unveil the centerpiece of our show," Mr. Sterling said, his voice rising with excitement. "The artist is a young woman who has remained anonymous until tonight. Her work has taken the internet by storm, not because she has the right connections, but because her art makes people feel." The crowd murmured with curiosity. The woman in the red dress whispered, "I hope it's not something weird." "I hate modern art," Mr. Sterling smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to be surprised. The artist is here with us tonight. She is closer than you think," stepped back and gestured to the large red cloth on the wall. Aisha looked at her mother one last time. Her mother was looking up now, her eyes wide, waiting. She didn't know what was coming. She just knew that Aisha was somewhere in the room, watching. Aisha pushed herself away from the table. She stood up straight. She smoothed her blue dress. It was time. The time for being invisible was over. The time for being the cleaning lady's daughter was done. She took a step forward, moving out of the shadows and toward the light. The room became very quiet. The only sounds were the soft rustle of clothes and the clinking of ice settling in glasses. Mr. Sterling stood behind the podium, looking out at the hundreds of faces. He seemed pleased with the suspense he had created. He liked drama, and he knew how to make people wait. Aisha took a few more steps away from the refreshment table. She moved into an open space where she could see clearly. Her heart was beating fast, but her hands were steady. She felt a strange sense of calm take over her. For years, she had watched events like this from the sidelines. She had watched other people get the awards, other people get the praise. While she worked in the background, scrubbing, serving, or just trying to stay out of the way. Tonight, the script was flipped. "For the past year," Mr. Sterling said, his voice booming through the speakers, "the art world has been captivated by a mystery. An artist known only as M. River appeared on the digital scene. She didn't paint pretty landscapes. She didn't paint bowls of fruit. She painted life. She painted the things we usually choose not to look at." Paused again. The woman in the red dress leaned toward her friend and whispered something, rolling her eyes. She seemed bored. She wanted to see the painting and then go eat dinner. "This artist sold out her entire collection in 10 minutes, Mr. Sterling continued. "Critics have called her work raw, honest, and devastatingly beautiful. but no one knew who she was. She refused interviews. She refused gallery shows. Until tonight, he gestured toward the large shape covered by the red cloth on the wall. It was massive, stretching from the floor almost to the ceiling. The crowd stared at it, trying to guess what was underneath. Some people expected a famous European painter, Mr. Sterling said. Some expected an older man with a white beard. But M. River is none of those things. Aisha could feel the eyes of the room scanning the crowd. They were looking for someone famous. They were looking for someone who looked like a star. The tall man stood with his arms crossed, his eyes moving over the faces in the front row. He assumed the artist was probably someone he had read about in a magazine or seen on social media. This piece, Mr. Sterling said, pointing to the covered wall, is called The Foundation. It is a portrait. But it is not just a portrait of a face. It is a portrait of hands. Hands that have held a family together. Hands that have worked when they were tired. Hands that have cleaned, cooked, and comforted. The woman with the sparkling necklace let out a small, disinterested sigh. Oh, hands. How avant-garde, she whispered sarcastically to her friends. Mr. Sterling took hold of the edge of the red cloth. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to the artist of the year and the inspiration for this masterpiece. With a swift motion, he pulled the cloth down. It slid off the painting and pooled onto the floor like soft, red water. The crowd gasped. The lights in the gallery dimmed slightly, and spotlights hit the canvas. It was a hyper-realistic painting, done on a massive scale. It showed the hands of an older woman. They were large hands, the skin a little loose, the veins visible. There were calluses on the palms and small scars on the knuckles. One hand was holding a rough yellow scrubbing brush. The other hand was resting on a table, palm up. The skin looked wrinkled from being in water too much. But the way it was painted, the lighting, the detail, the sheer reverence, it made those hands look majestic. It made them look like the hands of a queen. The background was dark. So all the focus was on the texture of the skin and the worn bristles of the brush. Aisha stared at the painting. It was the best thing she had ever done. She had painted it from memory, watching her mother at the kitchen sink late at night. The room was silent for a long moment. The socialites were confused. They didn't recognize the hands. They didn't understand why this was the main event. It didn't match their furniture. It wasn't pretty. And now, Mr. Sterling said, his voice soft but full of pride, the artist, she is not a stranger to this gallery. In fact, she is part of this gallery's family. Please welcome Aisha. Aisha stepped forward. At first, nobody moved. The name didn't mean anything to them. They looked around, confused. Aisha. Who is Aisha? Someone muttered near the back. Then Aisha walked fully into the light. She was standing just a few feet away from the group of people who had been mocking her. The woman in the red dress turned her head. The tall man lowered his arms. They saw the girl in the simple blue dress. The girl they had called pathetic. The girl they had assumed was a kitchen worker. Aisha walked past them. She didn't look at them. She didn't smirk or glare. She just walked by, her chin held high. She walked up the 3 steps to the stage and shook Mr. Sterling's hand. The silence was heavy. It was the silence of shock. The wealthy guests looked at the girl on the stage, then back at the painting of the rough working-class hands. They looked at the woman in the red dress, and the tall man were suddenly standing very still, their faces pale. Aisha walked to the microphone. She adjusted the height slightly. She looked out at the sea of faces. She saw her mother standing near the pillar. Her mother had dropped her rag. Her hands were covering her mouth, and her eyes were wide with tears. She was looking at the painting, recognizing her own hands, realizing what her daughter had done. "Thank you," Aisha said into the microphone. Her voice was clear and steady, echoing in the large room. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for believing in me." She looked directly at the spot where the rude group was standing. They looked frozen. "This painting," Aisha continued, turning back to the audience, "it's called The Foundation because that is what working people are. They are the foundation of everything we have. My mother has cleaned this floor for 10 years. She has scrubbed these windows. She made sure this room was perfect for you to stand in tonight." The crowd began to whisper. People started to look at each other, then at the staff members who were standing along the walls. They started to feel uncomfortable. The magic of the evening had shifted. "I didn't paint this to shock you," Aisha said. "I painted it because beauty is not just about diamonds or expensive gowns. Beauty is dignity. Beauty is getting up every day and doing hard work without complaining. Beauty is loving your family so much that you give your life for them." She pointed to the painting. "Those hands raised me. Those hands paid for my paints and my brushes. Those hands are the reason I am standing here today." Aisha looked at the tall man. He was looking at his shoes now. He couldn't meet her eyes. The woman in the red dress was fidgeting with her purse, looking for an escape. The woman with the sparkling necklace just stared at the painting, her face unreadable. "Some people might look at those hands and see nothing but scrubbing," Aisha said, her voice dropping to a softer, more intimate tone. "Some people might think that because someone wears a uniform they are invisible. But tonight, I wanted to show you that those hands are worth more than all the jewelry in this room combined." The audience erupted into applause. It started slow, with just a few people clapping, but then it grew. It became a wave of sound. People were impressed. They loved the drama of it. They loved the starving artist becomes a star story. But more importantly, Aisha had made them think. She stood on the stage, bathed in the warm light. She was no longer the cleaning lady's daughter in their eyes. She was a star. She was a genius. She was the one with the power. Aisha looked back at her mother. Her mother was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. She was smiling so wide. Aisha smiled back at her. This wasn't about winning over the rich people. It wasn't about their applause. This was for her mother. It was a public declaration that her mother's life mattered. The applause died down, and Aisha stepped back from the microphone. The night was far from over, but the battle was won. The script had been rewritten, and the girl from the shadows was now standing in the spotlight. The applause was loud, filling the entire room like a physical wave. It echoed off the high ceiling and the glass walls. For most people in the room, this was the best part of the night. They loved to be near success. They loved to say they were there when the unknown artist became famous. They clapped their hands together, some of them looking around to see who else was clapping, making sure they were showing the right amount of enthusiasm. But in the front row, near the refreshment table, the air was very still. The tall man and the two women stood frozen. Their smiles were gone. The color had drained from their faces. Earlier they had felt powerful. They had felt safe in their high tower of money and status, looking down at the world below. Now, that tower felt very shaky. The tall man stared at Aisha on the stage. He tried to process what had just happened. He remembered the words he had spoken only minutes ago. Asterisk, it's just desperate. They should know where they belong. The words now felt like hot stones in his throat. He looked at the painting of the rough, scarred hands, and then he looked at Aisha. He realized she had heard every word he said. She had stood right there, listening to him mock her life, her mother, and her struggle, without saying a word back. She hadn't argued. She had just let her art speak for her. The woman in the red dress felt a strange tightness in her chest. It was shame, a feeling she almost never experienced. She looked at her expensive dress and the shiny glass in her hand. Suddenly, these things felt very small. She looked at the painting again. For the first time, she really looked at it. She saw the details in the knuckles, the way the skin was textured from years of work. She realized that the woman who owned those hands had scrubbed floors to make a life for the girl standing on the stage. The woman in the red dress had inherited her money from her father. She had never scrubbed a floor in her life. She realized she had never created anything real. She only bought things. The woman with the sparkling necklace was the first to move. She took a step back, trying to hide behind the tall man. She didn't want Aisha to look at her. She felt exposed. It was as if a bright light had been turned on in a dark room, revealing all the dust and dirt that was usually hidden. She prided herself on knowing everyone who was anyone. But she had dismissed the most talented person in the room because of a blue dress. She felt foolish. On the stage, Aisha watched the crowd. She saw the change in their faces. They weren't looking at her with pity anymore. They were looking at her with respect. They were looking at her with envy. It was a strange feeling for her. 5 minutes ago, she was invisible. Now, she was the sun, and everyone was orbiting around her. Mr. Sterling returned to the microphone. He looked very happy. This was exactly the kind of moment that made his gallery famous. A truly moving tribute, he said into the microphone. Now, we will open the floor for questions. I know many of you are eager to speak with Aisha. A few hands went up. People from the back of the room, art collectors and critics, stepped forward. A tall man with a gray beard pushed his way to the front. He held a notebook. Aisha, he said, his voice serious. The technique you used on the brush bristles, it is incredibly difficult. Where did you train? Aisha leaned toward the microphone. I didn't train in a school, she said simply. I watched videos on the internet. I practiced at night after my shift at the diner ended. The room buzzed with whispers. Asterisk the diner? They looked at her simple clothes again. The narrative was becoming even more interesting to them. Arags Turich's story was their favorite kind of story. Another person raised a hand. A young woman this time, wearing glasses. The emotion in the piece is overwhelming. Was it hard to keep your identity a secret? Aisha smiled, a small, sad smile. I didn't want to be judged by my name or my background. I wanted people to judge the work. I wanted to know if the art was good enough on its own. I see now that I was right to be afraid. As soon as I walked out, some of you looked at my dress before you looked at the painting. Few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The young man with the microphone from the news crew zoomed in on her face. But Aisha continued, I am done hiding. I am proud of where I come from. I am proud of my mother. She turned away from the microphone and walked to the edge of the stage. She looked directly at the spot where her mother was standing. Her mother was still near the pillar, crying softly. Aisha motioned for her to come forward. Her mother shook her head frantically. She was terrified. She did not want to walk into that crowd of rich people. She felt she didn't belong there. Please, Aisha said into the microphone, but she was looking at her mother. Come here, Mom. The crowd parted. It was like the sea parting for a ship. The guests stepped back, creating a clear path from the pillar to the stage. They were curious. They wanted to see the woman who had inspired the masterpiece. Slowly, Aisha's mother walked forward. She wrung her hands together nervously. She didn't look at the people. She just looked at the floor. She felt like she was walking to her execution instead of to a celebration. When she reached the steps of the stage, she hesitated. Aisha ran down the steps. She didn't care about the protocol or the fancy event. She reached the bottom step and hugged her mother. She wrapped her arms around the older woman tightly. The crowd gasped, then sighed. It was a picture of pure love. I'm so proud of you, Aisha whispered into her mother's ear, loud enough for the microphones to pick it up. You are the masterpiece. From her spot near the refreshment table, the woman in the red dress felt a tear roll down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, annoyed at herself. She didn't want to cry. She wanted to stay cool and detached. But watching Aisha hold her mother broke down her defenses. It reminded her of her own mother, who she hadn't visited in months because she was too busy. The tall man stood with his hands in his pockets. He watched the reunion on the stage. He looked at his shoes, feeling a deep sense of hollowness. He realized he had spent his entire life trying to impress people who didn't care about him. Aisha had spent her life loving the person who mattered most. He had mocked Aisha, but in reality, she was the richer one. She had something real. The flashbulbs from the cameras went off in a blinding flurry of white light. Photographers were snapping pictures of the hugging pair. Tomorrow, this image would be on the front page of every newspaper and art blog in the country. The headline would read something like, Asterisk, the cleaning lady, and the star. Asterisk, the woman with the sparkling necklace, looked at the group of friends she was standing with. Suddenly, they looked different to her. They looked shallow. They looked small. She realized she didn't want to stand with them anymore. She didn't want to be the kind of person who mocked hard work. She put her glass of champagne down on a tray without drinking it. She felt sick to her stomach. On the stage, Aisha let go of her mother and helped her up the steps. Her mother stood there, trembling, holding Aisha's hand. Aisha turned back to the crowd. "This is her," Aisha said. "This is the woman who cleaned your shoes and wiped your spills so that I could have a future. If you liked the painting, you are honoring her. If you think the painting is beautiful, it is because she is beautiful." The crowd erupted into applause again. This time, it was different. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was loud and genuine. Some people were cheering. The tall man started to clap slowly. He didn't know why, but he felt he had to. The women next to him joined in. Aisha stood there, holding her mother's hand, bathed in the spotlight and the applause. She had turned the tables. She had taken the night away from the elite and given it back to the people who built the world. The mockery had died, replaced by a respect that money could not buy. The party continued. But the mood had changed forever. The people in the room would remember this night, not because of the free drinks or the fancy clothes, because a girl in a blue dress showed them what true greatness looked like. They would remember the moment they realized they were the background characters in someone else's triumphant story. The applause finally started to fade away, but the energy in the room had changed completely. It felt lighter now, as if a heavy storm had passed, and the air was fresh again. People were talking in excited whispers, gesturing toward the stage and the massive painting of the hands. The atmosphere was no longer one of stiff superiority. Instead, there was a buzz of genuine curiosity, and, for some, sense of awe. Aisha helped her mother step back from the edge of the stage. Her mother was shaking, her face flushed with a mix of fear and overwhelming pride. She held on to Aisha's arm tightly, as if she were afraid she might fall if she let go. Mr. Sterling returned to the microphone, looking like a man who had just won the lottery. He beamed at the audience. "Thank you, Aisha, and thank you to your mother for inspiring such magnificent work. Please, enjoy the rest of the evening. The bar is open, and the exhibit is now officially yours to explore." As he stepped away, a small queue began to form near the stage steps. It wasn't the usual line of people wanting to talk to the host. It was people wanting to talk to Aisha. Collectors, critics, and other artists were waiting for a chance to shake her hand or ask her a question. They held out their business cards and glasses of wine, their faces eager. 5 minutes ago, they would have walked right past her without a second glance. Now, she was the most important person in the room. Aisha looked down at the crowd of people waiting for her attention. She saw the eagerness in their eyes, but she also saw the calculation. They wanted a piece of her success. They wanted to say they knew her first. She looked at her mother, who was shrinking back against the curtain, overwhelmed by the flashing cameras and the noise. "Are you okay, Mom?" Aisha whispered, leaning close. "I think so," her mother replied softly, her voice trembling just a little. "There are so many people. We don't have to stay," Aisha said. "We can go right now." "This is your night," her mother insisted. "You should stay. You should talk to them." "I already did what I came to do," Aisha said. She smiled warmly. "I showed them the painting. I introduced you. The rest is just noise." Just then, the tall man from the refreshment table stepped out of the crowd. He looked different now. His arrogance was gone. He held his hat in his hands, twisting it nervously. The woman in the red dress and the one with the sparkling necklace were standing a few feet behind him. They looked hesitant, their eyes fixed on the floor. The tall man cleared his throat. He looked up at Aisha, meeting her eyes for the first time. He didn't look angry or superior anymore. He looked humble. "Excuse me, miss," he said. His voice was much quieter than it had been earlier. I just wanted to say congratulations. The painting it is really quite beautiful." The room went quiet around them. People stopped talking to listen. Aisha looked at him. She remembered his cruel laugh. She remembered the way he had mocked her mother's hands and her own dreams. She could have been angry. She could have turned her back on him. She could have used her new power to humiliate him in front of everyone, just as he had tried to humiliate her. But Aisha saw the way his shoulders were slumped forward. She saw the shame in his eyes. He wasn't a villain. He was just a man who had made a mistake and was now realizing it. Being cruel to him wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't make her better. Thank you, Aisha said simply. Her voice was kind, but it carried a strength that made the man flinch slightly. I appreciate that. The man nodded. He looked down at his shoes again. And I am sorry, he mumbled. For the things I said earlier, I was wrong. I was ignorant. I heard you, Aisha said, and I forgive you. The woman with the sparkling necklace stepped forward. She looked at Aisha's mother. I am sorry too, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I judged you by your uniform and I shouldn't have. That was wrong of me. Aisha's mother looked at the woman. She saw the sincerity in her eyes. Aisha's mother had been looked down upon her entire life. She had been treated like she was less than human because of her job. She had never expected an apology, especially not from a woman in a diamond necklace. It is okay, Aisha's mother said softly. She reached out and gently patted the woman's hand. Water washes everything clean. We start fresh. The woman looked surprised, then deeply moved. She nodded and stepped back, wiping a tear from her eye. Aisha realized then that she had won. She hadn't just won the argument. She had won the moment. By showing kindness to people who mocked her, she had shown them exactly what true class looked like. It wasn't about money or clothes. It was about how you treated others. She turned back to the crowd of waiting people. I am sorry, she said to them, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. But I am not going to answer any more questions tonight. I am not going to sign any contracts. Tonight belongs to my mother, and we are going home. A murmur of surprise went through the room, but no one complained. They respected her decision. They stepped aside to let her pass. Aisha put her arm around her mother's shoulders and guided her down the steps. They walked through the crowd, but this time the ocean of people parted for them like magic. No one looked at them with disgust. No one whispered about their clothes. They watched them with reverence. They saw the beauty in the simple blue dress and the gray uniform. They saw the strength and the bond between the mother and the daughter. They walked past the tall man and the women. They walked past the reporters and the cameras. They walked past the expensive sculptures and the golden light fixtures. None of that mattered anymore. They reached the service exit at the back of the gallery. It was a simple steel door that led out to the alleyway. Aisha pushed it open. The cool night air rushed in to meet them. It was fresh and crisp, smelling of the city and the night sky. The noise of the party faded away as the door clicked shut behind them. Out here it was quiet. There were no cameras. No reporters. No fancy dresses. There was just a brick wall covered in ivy and a single street lamp casting a warm, yellow glow on the pavement. Aisha's mother took a deep breath and let it out in a long sigh. She looked at her daughter, her eyes shining with tears. You were amazing, she whispered. I am so proud of you. I cannot even say it. I did it for you, Aisha said, squeezing her mother's shoulder. I wanted them to see what I see. I wanted them to see how beautiful you are. Her mother laughed and shook her head. They don't care about us, my love. They only care about the painting. Maybe, Aisha said, looking up at the stars peeking out between the buildings. But for one night, they looked. And for one night, they listened. That is enough. They walked down the alleyway together, their footsteps echoing softly on the pavement. They didn't need a taxi or a fancy limousine. They didn't need the applause of strangers to validate their worth. They had each other. They had their dignity. And they had the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had stayed true to who they were. The gallery was behind them, full of rich people drinking expensive wine and talking about art. But the real art, the true masterpiece, was walking away. It was the love between a mother and a daughter, walking side by side into the quiet night. The cleaning lady and the famous artist, they were just two people going home. As they turned the corner to walk toward their neighborhood, the lights of the gallery faded into the distance. They walked on, leaving the judgment and the fame behind them, ready for a simple cup of tea in the comfort of their own small, beautiful world.